Hey, this is Zachlog the Great, and I am here tonight with Uriel.
Hello.
And with Harry Seldon.
Good evening.
And with Codex, who is half of the team behind Vegfolk Fables. Would you like to mention that, by the way? We lost your mic.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Vegfolk Fables is currently on hiatus but you can read up to the current adventure at Arkhaven Comics on the web or at tempestinateardrop.com, which goes a little further. We are committed to continuing the story though, so stay tuned.
Okay, and let's see, and I'll put links in to both of those in the show description. And the four of us are getting together tonight to talk about the third book in Jim Butcher's Dresden Files series, Grave Peril. And Uriel has agreed to get us kicked off with a brief. Okay, I will say, by the way, before we get into it, this is going to be a discussion of the book, not so much a review in the sense of should I read it. There are going to be spoilers all over the place, okay? So if you have not read it, but you find the plot summary coming up interesting, I would suggest you go read it, and then please, by all means, come back and listen to our discussion. So
if you want to know whether you should read it, we started discussing the Dresden Files on this channel 6 years ago, and we're still discussing it now. So clearly, we think that there's something worth discussing in this series. Without spoilers, there's not really that much more I can say, but I think we would recommend reading it and making your own judgment.
Okay, so Uriel, you're up.
Okay. Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden is Chicago's only consulting wizard, and his life has been looking up. He has regular work. He has a girlfriend. He's been having lots of fun kicking ass and taking names with his best friend Michael Carpenter, who's a real-life paladin. But danger is threatening Chicago once again. Someone, or something, is riling up Chicago's ghosts, torturing them with black magic. And this mysterious mastermind is somehow connected to the Red Court of Vampires. There's a ghastly killer on the loose, attacking the innocents of Chicago where they should be safe. Harry isn't going to stand for that. Come the ghosts of hell or high water, he's going to stand up between the people of Chicago and the darkness, even if he has to die doing the right thing. To solve this case, Harry will have to survive his fairy godmother's loving attention, vampire politics, and his relationship with his girlfriend with the unfortunate habit of getting in over her head in dangerous situations, all the while facing up to his mistakes, past and present, and enduring the consequences of his choices.
Okay. I do have one question before we go any further. What's a paladin?
The 12 paladins of but it comes from the 12 paladins of Charlemagne, right? The companions of Roland.
Oh no,
right?
I'm pretty sure it's the final upgrade of the Knight line. It's one after Cavalier and comes with bonus damage and bonus pierce armor.
Okay, that was a Spoonie experiment reference. So if you haven't seen those, I'm not offended, but those videos are worth watching. It's a he did a Noah Antweiler, aka the Spoonie one, did a series of videos reviewing the Ultima computer role-playing games. And the Ultima 9 is widely regarded as a complete disaster, and it's the last one in the series. It's widely regarded as a complete disaster, and at one point, one of the characters who should not be asking this question asks, "What's a paladin?" And and Spoonie basically flips out on this. And so, if you're familiar, what's a paladin is the anyway. Sorry. We can't hear you again.
Sorry, I'd like to digress briefly because there is an entire contingent of young men who are in dire need of books that are worth reading, that are written at challenging, for me, a 5th or 6th grade reading level. Jim Butcher's books are a Fleisch Kincaid reading level of grade 5 to 6. Which means if you have a young man who isn't reading a lot and who needs to get into books and get that skill level higher, Stormfront, these are great books to give to a young man, okay? Assuming you've already got a good Christian frame, because there's some stuff that's not so great, but it's still excellent. Can I get a copy of the text of your intro, Uriel? Because I could take that and I could sell that to a group of teenage boys like that with what you wrote down.
I'll throw it to you after we finish here. But I kind of have to. I don't know necessarily disagree, but there's some pretty racy stuff in some of these, and there's some pretty adult stuff in some of these. And if you think your kid can be trusted to not read where it's appropriate, then I 100% recommend. But or if you're reading to them, but not.
When I say teenage boys, sorry, I need to be clear. I am not talking middle school kids. That's what I call them preteens. These are 17, 18-year-old high school kids who are non-readers. And for them, Stormfront has been, like with Dick Francis, who's also racy, but he's more challenging to read. An introduction to, oh my gosh, there's a book I can read as a young man that doesn't hate me as a young man. And it's fun and it's exciting and it's not perfect, but the good evil axis is clearly defined and is not going to throw anyone from a Christian worldview completely for a loop. You want parent supervision, of course, obviously, but it's a great book for kids, young men who don't read.
Yeah.
Is there a place where you can input a text and see like Fleisch Kincaid reading level? I'm just curious about like various other.
Back when I was still a working professional librarian, yes, I can probably find it again. But in the past, you can't just, unless you can find a digital copy that you can cut
I found
from.
a digital copy. I'm sending it to you.
Beautiful. You can just type it. I hand typed it in back in the day, like 3 or 4 pages, and then fed it into the machine because it seemed like it would be a really good book if they could read it, and turns out they can. Anyways, digression. But if you got teenage boys, 17, 18, who don't read, keep this in mind, right? Homeschool for the win.
Okay. So,
by the way, this is all to give you guys about 5 minutes to buy the book and read it if you really don't want spoilers. So now is actually the last chance.
Don't let me forget, if you haven't read it yet and you aren't still not convinced, because this book is totally awesome. And look at how battered my copy is. It is falling apart. I read it so many times. There's something called archive.org that has this edition, still downloadable, still read for free with a free account, first 3 books. Just saying, first 3 are free.
Okay.
This is like first hit is free, isn't it?
I'm such a librarian. Read.
So, before we go much further, I'm going to tell kind of a personal story about like my first time reading this book. I picked up these books several years ago on the recommendation of my friend Chris, who had been talking about them for a little while. And I don't remember what the first ones I read were, but I read the series somewhat out of order. I may have read Stormfront first, but then I read like book 5 or 6. I think Death Masks might have been the next one I read. I could be wrong. But anyway, I read that one. and then like read different parts of the series, and I later came back and read Grave Peril. Now, in Death Masks or whichever one it was, Harry is like weighed down by this terrible guilt of having let Susan Rodriguez down in this book. By the way, spoilers starting here. Okay, so I'm warning you. If that bothers you, go read it and come back. Okay. Anyway, he's weighed down by this terrible guilt of what he let happen or what he made happen to Susan Rodriguez. And so I come back to this book and I'm reading this book and I get to that part. I'm like, oh, Harry, this is not your fault. Susan was stupid. She did something very stupid. And she should have known. She had it by this time. She should have had enough contact with some of these things to have at least some idea of how stupid a thing she was doing. Harry, this was not your fault.
But the reason he blamed himself was that Susan called beforehand while he was in the middle of fighting the demon. And then he didn't call her back. He got too distracted from the whole fighting a demon thing. And he told Michael, I'll call her back, and didn't. And he realized after the fact that if he had, he probably could have warned Susan just how monumentally bad of an idea this was beforehand, instead of having to warn her at a dramatically appropriate time during the party itself.
As someone who's put my work before my family and regretted it, I understand his guilt. It's a legitimate thing to be guilty about. Also, keep in mind, in previous books, he has been playing that game of Harry's got secrets, the White Council, and I can't tell you for your own good. So he tends to explain less. There's good reasons for that. The White Council will kill you if you share their secrets. If you know too much and you're seen noticing Fairy will notice you back and kill you. So he's not a jerk about it, but he has discovered he's making mistakes by protecting people for their own good, both men and women. And that's going to be a theme that comes up later on, as far late as Turncoat, where he's going to discover that I can't protect these people by keeping them in ignorance. The best option is to really pay attention to them, where they're at. Think of your children you raise, and make sure they have what they need to know when they need to know it, which means engaging with the people who you trust, the people you love, the people you're responsible for, not necessarily putting them second to the mission. And that's a challenge for him, because the mission is life and death for a whole lot of people.
Can I throw something out here? And this is not in any way a rag on this work. I have to say, I thought that Full Moon, just from a technical perspective, I think is his least polished work. You can tell he's feeling his way into doing what it is. But even though I think this is really, really great, especially given that this is major, this is the foundation of all his later character development in Grave Peril. I don't find it very enjoyable to read, though, because that depends on him making a lot of not just mistakes, but outright morally incorrect decisions, and I really don't like that in my heroes. And he faces up to that, and that is why I specifically, said that in the little stinger. But he faces that, and that is exactly the right thing to take here. Not, this modernist, but you see it most with the girl boss, oh, you're perfect just the way you are, BS. But he faces his mistakes. He faces the fact that he almost got Amarakius destroyed. He faces the fact that he disappointed Michael, that he failed Susan, that he caused Charity, a pregnant woman, just so... Anyway, he sees all that, and he faces it, and he accepts the consequences of his decisions. But that doesn't make reading about those bad choices, about, his godmother and all the other things, it doesn't make those reading about those choices any more pleasant. Let's put it from my perspective.
I gotta agree with you there. It's not fun to read, and I think part of it's because of the job the writer has done in getting you invested in Harry Dresden as a human being, to the point that it's
if he was your friend,
painful to
you
read.
would tell him, "Don't do the thing that you're doing. It's
Yeah.
wrong."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you want to say that because you care. You care about him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So you can see the polish, the skill that Butcher has moved on as a writer. This is, by the way, the first book that the reason I'm rereading the rest of the series right now, I'm up to changes, is because I could read the first book, do the discussion, read the second book, do the discussion. I read the third book, and I said, I can't stop. I need to find out what happens next.
Well,
even though I know what happens next.
In terms of like the way looking at the first two and looking at this one, this is the one where it seems like Jim Butcher is like, okay, I'm going to do a series. And I don't know where I picked this up, but I've heard that he said that like he laid down a lot of things in this book that become important later in the series, in particular in the party scene, but there's other parts too. And it is pretty fascinating, once you've read that, the other books coming back and seeing this. For instance, wait, let me see if I can find that. I have this in my notes. Oh, I think I have some notes. Well, okay. For one thing, like he introduces a lot of characters that become important later in the series. He had mentioned his fairy godmother. He had mentioned her previously. We didn't see her until this book. There's Michael Carpenter. Some people say it feels kind of dropped in out of nowhere.
A little.
And I think I kind of get that, but it doesn't seem that late in the series. What's up?
Oh, I agree with it. I'm willing to forgive it, but it is a little bit awkward that he wasn't mentioned, given that he met Michael 5 years ago, before the events of the first book. If it was, we met 6 months ago, shortly after the first book, when all this ghost turbulence started, I think it would be a little bit more believable that he wouldn't ever have considered in the first two books, maybe I should call Michael up and ask for help.
Yeah.
That's true. But I have to say, even though this isn't at the very beginning with the introduction, this is one of the best establishing character, maybe establishing relationship moments that he uses to introduce him with the, damn it, hellhounds, Harry, language, damn it, heckhounds.
Yes. Harry, you told a lie.
That was great.
It's brilliant piece of writing there. It just establishes you could totally. It's punchy. It's short. You could totally, completely get the dynamic between these two, just from that one little scene.
Yes.
Well, okay. So the part I was looking for, like I said, there's little things all over the place that become important later in the series. One of which I only noticed this time through. It's in chapter 22, and Harry basically needs Michael's help, but Michael's wife and baby are in the hospital in very poor condition. And basically, Harry figures out what emotional button to push to get Michael to go along with him. And he kind of hates himself for it, but it works. And Harry says about Michael, he'd follow me into hell. So Harry, about Michael following you into hell. For those who haven't read it, I'm referencing a significantly later book, Skin Game.
Hey guys, no spoilers for the later books. That is not fair. I mean, vague references, yes, but
Yeah.
people
Also,
read this up to this point.
Things that become important later. When Harry, Michael, and Susan are trying to get out of the party, and Leah is standing in their way, and they're trying to bargain with her. One of the things Leah, the fairy godmother, asks for is Michael's daughter Molly.
Oh, I have said this time.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
I caught that.
Ooh.
And the one other reference I caught, this is from chapter 13, where he uses his sight on Mickey Malone, but also sees some of the others. He sees Murphy, and when he sees Murphy as she actually is, she's holding a blazing sword in her hand. Yeah. And I am convinced, in hindsight, that is also foreshadowing.
But I'm not saying you're wrong, because you're probably right. But isn't there also a point where he sees her wielding a sword in his sight, and it's a service revolver?
Yeah, that's oh crud. That's when they're about to raid Mavra's lair. Which book is that?
Yeah.
Is that...
Okay. Yeah.
Deadbeat.
No, that's not Deadbeat.
No.
Deadbeat's after.
Is that Blood Rites or Death Masks?
Death Masks.
Yeah, I think
it's the one where his hand. It's the one where his left hand ends up.
You're right.
Ends up crispy critters. But okay. In fact, okay. There's several little things like that. If you know what to look for, that when I ran across one particular line, in the party scene, I wondered if it was one of those that hasn't happened yet. So let me see if I can. Which chapter is the party scene? Someone.
The party scene ranges all throughout the 20s.
Right.
Starts with chapter.
Leia is in chapter 27 for meeting Leia.
And chapter 24 is when they enter the party.
Chapter 25 is what I'm looking for.
Yep.
Let me see.
I'm afraid I don't pay much attention to chapter numbers.
Nope. Let's see. Dragons. Okay. Where is it? But Harry is talking to a dragon in the guise of a human. Pharaohvax,
this is chapter 26, midway through.
Okay, who does appear later in the series. And Harry, as usual, is mouthing off to someone much stronger than him. There it is. Harry, I don't like bullies. You think I'm going to stand here and offer you my firstborn and sacrifice virgins to you or something? I'm waiting for the book where, Harry and Pharaohvax are having a conversation about her name. Oh gosh.
Yeah, his daughter. Yeah.
What's her name?
Maggie.
There it is.
Oh, Maggie. Yes.
Where Harry and Pharaohvax are having a conversation about Maggie. I don't know, but there's enough here in this book that does that kind of thing that I kind of wonder if Maggie is going to end up working for Pharaohvax in some capacity, who evidently is not entirely a bad guy, or I guess. Well, I guess by the time you get to Battlegrounds, there's bad guys and very, very bad guys, and the bad guys are close enough, so we'll take their help. So, anyway,
if we're talking about foreshadowing, another thing that another Chekhov's gun that might fire later. So the infants that Harry and Michael save at the beginning of this book from the rampaging ghost Agatha Hagglethorne, this does come up later.
Some
when
cop helps him
an
because
EMT.
he's like, "This guy stopped all the infant deaths."
That's right.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, an EMT
Yeah, I remember
at the
that.
same hospital. This is in Deadbeat. What I'll be very interested in is that right about now, those children are going to be adults. Those infants are now going to be adults. Roughly 20 years has passed in universe since Grave Peril. And I will be very
Really?
curious to see if any of the infants, especially the one who's specifically named, Allison Ann Summers, I'm going to be very interested to know if she shows up, because the last name of Summers in a series focuses so heavily on the fairy realm and on the winter and summer courts and all the rest of it. It feels like a Chekhov's gun that could fire.
Living with a writer, I can tell you that even if it wasn't planned to be a Chekhov's gun, at some point he's going to notice it and go, "Oh my gosh, I have such a great idea."
Well, one of that would really play also that one short story that he did with Uriel and Michael and the corrupt priest.
The
remember that?
the warrior.
Oh, yes.
The warrior. Yeah, that's it. And
Right.
how the Uriel, from which inspired my handle, sits down with him and talks about, well, what good does it do? And he talks about, the consequences rippling out that are causing good effects a bit. And then Harry still tries to charge him for his services, but that's just Harry being a wit. But that would go very much into the point that I think is pretty central to Mr. Butcher's writing, and that is, the real victory is not beating up the ghost or the battery or whatever. It's the lives you saved along the way, even if those seemed incidental, so to speak.
Yeah, it would certainly fit. And something that shows up again and again, not just in this book, but throughout the entire series, is that actions have consequences, both good and bad. They have a discussion about this at the end of the book where Michael tells him that sometimes what goes around comes around, and sometimes you get what's coming around, and sometimes you are what's coming around. But that's not just I mean, he was thinking of it in a very negative way, because through divine intervention as punishment, he had ended up in the same ward, in the same hospital room as Charity Carpenter for 3 days. And he figured, well, I kind of deserved this. But at the same time, we see that it's not just the mistakes that he make that come back to haunt him years and decades later. The good that he does also comes back.
Casting his bread upon the waters.
Yeah,
I could see this coming back.
I think this is the central theme that Mr. Butcher is really pushing in his, I guess you call it central philosophy of the story or whatever. I don't know what you would call it. Root of world building, spirit of the story. I don't know what but reading. I forget what it's called, but the second to last one, the one before Battlegrounds, the one where they
Peace
have
Talks.
the heist.
Peace
Talks. Yeah, the heist one. And the way that he talks about free choice of the will and free will, and the argument with the angels and God and everything, and especially it's brought into a special relief there, but it's present all through this. It's not, for all that he really gets, I guess you would say, Christian spirit. This is fundamentally not a Christian understanding of the world, because it's almost like it's almost like giving a divine power to human choice of the will. Is what it is. Sort of like I'm not sure how to put it, but that is I think the central theme that he's building to about choices, and I think that's the common thread in all of his work. It's about choices and the consequences of choices and facing up to them. But
So to get back to the idea of like this book is setting up things. Okay. One other thing, this book introduces a lot of people, and we kind of mentioned this, a lot of people that are important later. Introduces Michael, obviously, very first scene. Introduces Thomas. Introduces Mavra. Introduces crud, what's the guy's name? The guy who comes in and is like, I'm just here to watch what happens. The vampire. At the end.
Thomas?
Oh, the Duke Don
Ortega.
Polo Ortega.
Ortega,
Oh,
yeah.
right, yes.
He's not major, but he is, a character. It doesn't introduce him, but in terms of the story, it sets up Waldo Butters.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
And Mortimer Lindquist, right?
I forgot about Mortimer. Yes, Mortimer Lindquist.
Honestly, Mortimer's more
explicitly
important than
introduced
Ortega. You wouldn't think.
I do kind of wonder, and I a little bit hope Butcher like touches on this at some point. I wonder what Mortimer contributed to the battle for Chicago. I feel like he by that point he would have wanted to and would have done something. I don't know what. Anyway, and so yeah, it sets up Waldo because he ends up where he is as a somewhat disgraced medical examiner, because he evaluated some of the bodies from Bianca's mansion, and he's like, I don't know what these are, but I know that they're not human. And they're like,
poor guy.
You're crazy. So,
well, look at what happens even nowadays to anybody who contradicts the narrative, even if it's
nowadays.
Scientifically sound, even if it's completely in compliance with everything, naming no names about epidemiology. 50 years worth of epidemiological practice, of which I was not unaware, suddenly disappeared because My Little Pony, that magic disease is magic. And anyone who said anything about it, and I can confirm because my Facebook account is now gone, and it was really mild. Like, here's what the World Health Organization and everyone else said about this for the last 50 years. Suddenly I'm crazy pants. So yeah, this is entirely plausible that he would say something that countered the narrative, and boom, re-education camp for you, Waldo Butters.
And we know that this has happened ever since book one with Special Investigations itself.
Yes.
Everybody there, in terms of characters that it's introducing, Rudolph, who is normally, he seems to really get less and less and less happy with the situation as he, as things go, as this books progress. Here, here he doesn't seem like a terrible person. He does not like Harry. He's fully in denial about the supernatural that they go up against, in large part because facing it would just be too huge of a shock. He quite sincerely he basically tells Harry that if he lets Murphy get killed, Rudolph's going to come after Harry. And Harry said, well, if that happens, I think I would let you. Yeah. So things definitely change by the end, but
let's hope that's not a Chekhov's gun.
I did find it believable that you would have somebody who's transferred there against his will after seeing something he really shouldn't have seen, and who just can't handle it. Because not everybody would be able to, I would think. Not everybody would be able to stay sane, coming to realize that everything you thought about the materialist nature of the world is just wrong.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, most people, a lot of people can't in very basic ways today.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a number of things I can point to where I'm like, okay, here are a set of facts. Okay.
Yep.
These are easily observable facts. I don't particularly like them. I don't love what they imply, but there they are. And most people you talk to, are just like, no, those
Mhm.
aren't. I'm not listening. And
Even
so
if it means that keeping your kid safe from having this young man, teenage boy, even if it means you have a trusting relationship with the person telling you the information, it means preventing them from getting myocarditis or sterility or a whole bunch of host of other things, all of which, again, this is all reasonable, backed with basic scientific information. But let's just assume this was all just like out of the blue, weird, woo-woo werewolves and demons stuff. Hey, it could save your kid's life. Even then, a good person, I'm speaking from experience, is going to break off that relationship with you rather than be forced to accept the uncomfortable truth, because that uncomfortable truth will cost this parent his or her employment, social status, might draw the eye of powers that don't want you to know this stuff. I mean, this is weirdly based, all things considered.
it's go ahead.
No, I can't. I sort of agree with you. I agree with you on most of this, but I can't agree with you fully because
Okay.
I remember somebody saying somewhere, men have loved the darkness because their deeds are evil,
Yeah.
and I think really mostly from self-reflection that is what it comes down to. If you prefer a lie to the truth, it's either because you are weak in some way and you aren't willing to face that weakness, because that's the compounding factor. You can always reject something immediately and then be like, wait a minute, I need to circle back and really think about that and face it. But you are weak and then you don't take steps to fix it.
Yeah.
Or because you prefer something to what is good. You prefer something else rather than what is good. You will have not what is good, but something that you want.
Well,
That's
and
evil.
it's
Men versus women, right there. Boom.
well, and it's also a little bit. I can't point to a specific, but it a little bit reminds me of kind of Stefan Molyneux, and him talking about like how we perpetuate certain bad things from our parents
Mm-hmm.
because we're unwilling to look at them and say what they did was wrong. They should not have done this thing. And what you excuse, what you make excuses for, you will continue. You will perpetuate. And so I think that's a part of it too.
I don't think it's very Dresden Files, though. I think Dresden
That's
Files
too.
is more Gen X. My parents screwed me. They did. Now I'm dealing with it.
Yeah.
His dad, who's Voldemort, original adopted dad. Well, no, he had a real father for a while, but he lost him. So the abandonment, albeit beyond his power. His first dad is Voldemort, and then we later learned that his second dad betrayed a trust. So, I mean, Gen X hero, right?
I have to throw something out here, though, because
Okay.
I think that my words are a bit too harsh, and I really need to walk back at least a little bit.
Okay.
I know this from also personal experience, not with myself, but with people who are close members of my family. You get people who have, what they call, I don't know, traumas or whatever, and they just have a switch in their brain, and it is literally welded shut, and you hit something that hits something, and it goes through that welded switch without any possible conscious control over it. And even recognizing that thing is welded shut is beyond most people.
Wow.
Like, just to give it an example, and this is a stupid example maybe, but I'm convinced that C.S. Lewis would have become a Catholic rather than an Anglican if he had not had such women issues from his mother when he was a child, dying and leaving him alone. That switch was welded shut in his brain. So
also being an Ulster Protestant from an Ulster community, I completely agree with you about that. I think he would have gone Catholic had his childhood experiences hadn't welded that option shut for him. It didn't help that he was in an Anglican country either, but he probably would have done better in France.
Okay, so as is the saying on the show, to get back to the book or back to the poem, there's one thing when I was coming back to this that I had in mind that bothered me in this story as what looked to me like a serious plot hole. Okay, and I don't know if about the time I was starting rereading this, I saw someone have a theory about this, and I read that chapter and I'm like, that actually kind of works. I don't think their theory spelled it out enough, but okay. Relatively early on in this book, the nightmare, which turns out to be Kravos, comes and takes a bite out of Harry, out of Harry's magical power. Right. Harry is operating at like half power for a lot of this book, for most of this book. Okay, and then in chapter 30, like at the end of this vampire ball, Harry calls up this firestorm. Okay, this is so far in the series, this is the single biggest thing we've seen him do. Okay, goes on does other stuff later, but by that point he's powered up more. He has other sources. Like, this is a pretty big deal. And it's like, but I thought you were operating at like half power. How did you do this? Then Harry collapses, and Michael is doing CPR. And Michael is doing CPR and praying for him. Okay? So the theory is that this actually was Harry's death curse, whether he intended it to be or not.
Oh.
Okay. And now my thing with this is, okay, the way Harry explains it, if a wizard does a death curse, like, it's not just his heart stops, like, everything that's keeping him going is gone. Okay? If someone else was there with him, if Michael wasn't there, if Thomas was there and was doing CPR on him, I don't think Harry's getting back up.
No.
I think Harry did a death curse, Michael did CPR and prayed for him, and God got him back up. I think like that it's not said, but like, otherwise that's a really serious plot hole. And that actually explains it, I think, and it fits.
And given that he does the same thing again deliberately near the end of the book.
Right, he does the same thing deliberately later. Well, but like, what the ghost does to Kravos's ghost does to him later, like, that's something where in a dream this happens, heart stops, CPR should get him back up. That seems like just CPR is going to work. But the first time, I don't think just CPR was going to do it.
But this is just after he goes on about the power of faith and everything, and you have the stuff like you know, the great scene with the vampire touching Michael and cozying up to him, and then which is a ton of fun. And we know that Michael doesn't do quite the same thing, but he does something similar in a later book when he's had his mind messed with, so he isn't using fire magic, and Michael prays over him, and well, wouldn't you know? You know, but I mean, that's not 100% the same, but I mean, you can totally see the similarities there. You know?
Harry's universe has physicality. It has mental activity as not just a physical thing, but you know, its own separate thing. And then he has, I guess, what you call nous, if you were Orthodox, you have this spiritual element that has a reality in the universe we inhabit. And everything he's done from this story and forward seems to fit that worldview. So I call plausible if I were doing a Mythbuster stamp.
So there is something I will bring up as a potential counter argument.
Okay.
And this isn't a later book, I know, so I'm going to be vague. Another character at one point is potentially dying.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a good character. And Harry, using his wizard sight, sees the angel of death standing there, waiting. And Harry attempts to threaten the angel into going away, thinking that the angel is going to take the character's soul and effectively kill him. And the angel says, well, Harry, you've got it completely backwards. There are a lot of people a lot of entities that would want to intercept this soul on the way to heaven if they could. I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen. But she also refuses to help the character because everything that led to being near death was a result of free choice. The angel was going to, bring him to his eternal reward, but was not going to keep him alive. I'm not sure how that fits in with the theory that Michael's prayer did bring back Harry.
Harry's not necessarily going to see the angel.
Well,
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that given that we see what it looks like when someone good is about to die,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure.
Someone good or someone
I'm not sure
faithful.
if that fits.
There's a difference.
Well, and it's see, but
True.
like part of the definition of a miracle is God chooses to act,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't have to.
Oh.
And so Michael prays, Harry doesn't get back up. God didn't have to, I don't know. I think it I'm not saying this is 100% ironclad, but I am saying it fits, and it also explains.
Mm-hmm.
It also explains what otherwise is like a serious contradiction to me.
And counter argument here.
Both before and after, he was very clear that he was running on fumes, and this is something that Butcher is pretty good about, both in this book and in the others. When he pushes himself to the limit, there are consequences for that. In the previous book that's referenced here, where he jumps out of a moving truck, he supercharges himself with ultra caffeine, essentially, and he jumps out of a moving truck to take on a whole other truck full of werewolves. And then he finds out the hard way that that doesn't actually increase the amount of energy that he has. It just makes him more confident, and he nearly gets killed as a result.
Yeah.
Butcher is very consistent about this, and about how when you're out, you're out.
Yep.
So I would say, yes, this is either a pretty big and unusual plot hole, or this is something else. And if it is something else, Zach, like your theory, I think has a lot of potential merit to it.
May I advance a counter argument here?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Angel is an angel, both in Dresden Files and in reality. Angel is a function, whatever that angel is. Angel's not supposed to do things outside of its function, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Sure.
Michael's a man. Michael has free choice of the will. Michael can help Harry. Angel can't. Not if it's an angel of death. Angel of death exists to be an angel of death.
Just reread a story about that by Zen Anderson called Three-Cornered and Secure. Highly recommend it. It has an angel like Uriel in it, prior to Dresden, who is two really, who show up to fix the highway interchange, which is causing an intertemporal, interspiritual problem, and they have to do some angel engineering, spiritual engineering to keep it from causing problems. It's awesome. But yeah, it's got the same limitation. The angel has to do the job the angel does, and I recommend it because the scene where the angel's trying to speak to the modern man, saying "Fear not." No, wait, wrong idiom. Well, where were they in time? I don't know. I didn't do very well in that portion of the angel exams. I was better at the plumbing. But fear not, anyways. Okay, dude.
So, one thing.
Well,
one thing
if we're on the subject of potential plot holes, there is one I noticed that I don't think has a clever explanation. I think this actually is a mistake. So here, in order to get to the mansion, in order to get to Bianca's mansion from the apartment, they go through the Never Never, and they go through the Never Never from Harry's apartment directly.
Ooh.
In Changes, it is a plot point that Harry has never once gone to the Never Never from his apartment, saying that when you do that sort of thing, you weaken the bounds of reality between here and Fairy, and that he never wanted to leave that potential opening into his home, because if he had, things could get to him from that opening. And I think that actually is a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I would
early
have to
books, there are
reread it.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
You have stuff where he's setting something up and then you never see it again.
Yeah.
Okay. So one thing, going back to the very beginning of this book, one thing kind of interesting, especially in contrast to the first two books, this one starts to use the literary term in media res. Okay. Michael and Harry are racing through the streets of Chicago. Are they in Harry's car in the first chapter?
Yes.
Okay, so they're racing through the streets of Chicago in a beat up Volkswagen Bug, on the way to the hospital to fight a ghost and prevent the ghost from killing babies. And then a couple of chapters later, we find out how we got there. And it's actually kind of interesting because, here, let me see. I have a note on chapter 4. Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is, in chapter 3, we go back and Harry's in his office. And yeah, he takes a couple of phone calls. And then this woman meets him outside his office as he's getting ready to leave, and she's like, "You have to help me." Chapter 3 is where the previous two books would have started.
Yes.
Mm.
Good point.
Chapter 3 is exactly the start of Stormfront and of Full Moon. And so it is interesting, both retaining the formula and changing it up.
I'm going to introduce a concept.
There are he definitely likes in medias res later on. He definitely uses it. The building was on fire.
The building was on fire, and it wasn't my fault.
One of the strongest opening sentences of any book. And yeah, I think he got started because of how well it worked here.
That used to be the tagline for
Also,
the blatant lies trope, didn't it? Even though it is technically true.
Another potential, I'm not even going to say plot hole, it's just, it would be something interesting to think about. During the final climactic battle against the Red Court, Harry is dressed in boxers with yellow duckies on them. And given that he got them from the Red Court laundry room, that means one of the vampires wears boxers with rubber duckies on them. And I'd like to know who.
Or one of the kids that the vampires ate.
That's true. Yeah.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
I actually hadn't thought of that. Oh, that's way sadder, actually.
Yeah.
Wow, brought you down there.
Yeah, that's entirely plausible. That is entirely plausible.
Yeah. I like the fact that that in Dresden's world, yes, the vampires sparkle, and by sparkle I mean they shine. They're appealing, they're cool, they're exciting. But at bottom they're rotten to the core, and they're disgusting, and they're awful, and they're horrible, and they eat kids.
I like that it's a mask.
He doesn't lose track of that.
I really like that it's a mask and not and not that their demons are actually good.
Yeah.
I still
you get some of that with the White Court, though. You get that with the White Court, but it's a lot closer because of all the other things he builds up about how they actually function. And I guess you would call it a reproductive sense. You know, how do the White Court make more of themselves? Yeah. They're really humans that are possessed, or something similar to that.
Right.
Well, and it's there is a similarity with the White Court and the Red Court also, in that in both cases, to become a full member, you do kill someone. Now, if I understand correctly, with the White Court, it is somewhat involuntary, or like you don't mean to, but you still kill someone. With the Red Court, it is also, again, it is voluntary, but it's also like, you know, in response to like just this tearing need inside of you. And so it's yeah.
He sets up choice.
But one of the things that he says, he talks about later with Molly, is that these converted creatures, it's like they retain some free will, but they just don't, like, I don't know, we say replenish it. You know, once they start giving in, they can't come back from that the way humans can. And you see that with Susan in particular in Changes, you know, because of what happens there. That she still had the free will to not be a monster, even though she'd already turned into one.
Yeah.
And
there's a consequences thing in here that you mentioned earlier, because between the White Court and the Red Court and the Black Court, you have degrees of informed consent. The idea at the Black Court, you're all in on this. Too bad, so sad. In the Red Court, you choose, but it's at driving need. In the White Court, you have to be tricked into choosing. And look at the degrees to which the demons can be controlled by the host. It's much easier for the White Court hosts to escape, should they want to, than it is for the Black Court host or the Red Court.
Like the difference between venial and mortal sin.
Yes,
about how it needs full consent of the will in order to be mortal.
Yeah.
And there's no way Butcher intended that, by the way, but that doesn't make it not true.
No.
Exactly. It's beautiful. I love it.
Truth converges on truth. But so where does the Jade Court fit in here then?
I have no clue.
I have heard
we'll have to wait till they show up.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in maybe the RPG in any sense, but I haven't we haven't seen them in the series.
Zachlog, you may want to know, I just read through, Jim Butcher did a 500 comment AMA on Reddit, and someone asked him about the mini death curse, and he didn't answer that question. So I don't know one way or the other. I was really excited that we were going to get an answer, but he does not answer that question.
That means the answer may be forthcoming.
That does seem to me like the kind of thing where if the answer was no, or if the answer was a simple no, you would just say no. Now, the answer
does not rule it out. That's all I'm saying. It does not rule the theory out.
The answer...
I said, the author suddenly goes, ooh, now I have an idea.
Also possible.
But it's let's see, what was more directly referring to the. Oh, one thing that was kind of interesting. This is at least the third time I've read this book. We got to Lydia, the woman who meets him outside his office. I'm like, I don't remember this character. How does she become a part of this? And I'm like, okay. So it was interesting seeing that. Oh, another thing. And again, I listened to our previous two talks not long before this one. And there's a thing that Butcher does in the second book where he has Harry in a dream talking to his own subconscious, and functionally that chapter is mostly a plot summary of everything so far. So basically, to remind the reader, this is where everything stands, and things are about to happen from here. And he does it again, and again, he does it pretty well. Because again, if you're reading this for the first time and you're not like looking at it analytically, you're not going to look at that chapter and be like, okay, blah blah blah. And where is that chapter? It's chapter 32. Is that? Yeah, chapter 32. Back in Harry's apartment after the party, Lydia kicks the crap out of Harry, and Thomas saves him. Possessed Lydia kicks the crap out of Harry, and Thomas saves him. And also, Harry explains to Thomas, "This is all the crap we've been through so far, and this is what I'm planning. And here's what we're doing next." And again, it's a skillful use of dialogue and characters interacting in a believable way to deliver exposition. This doesn't seem quite like an info dump. I wouldn't apply that term, but like mechanically, the way he's managing the story, I think it works pretty well. And again, it's because he has characters interacting to figure this stuff out, or to characters interacting to do this, and it is back and forth dialogue. It's not just one person kind of lecturing someone else.
But this is I'm not gonna say this isn't new, but this is a common theme. Like when he said, oh well, I need a talking head, so I will make my talking head an actual talking head, and it's a very, very clever way of getting around the problem, by making the talking head an engaging and funny character that provides tension too, because he's a bit of a cat and a wild card, right?
Bob does that. Not exactly the same thing, because Bob fits more into info dump territory.
Yeah.
But yeah. Also, one other thing, and I'm gonna have to eventually I'm gonna have to reread Deadbeat, if only to check this, or at least part of it, because when Harry meets this torture curse that he ends up, I don't know if it's ever actually fully established. He ends up deciding it was Mavra who did it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we really know. But Harry encounters this torture curse, and he basically says, "This is a kind of magic that feels fundamentally different from any kind of magic I have encountered before, and holy crap, does it scare me." And then in Deadbeat, he's talking to he's basically talking to Evil Bob, and Evil Bob is explaining some things about necromantic magic to him, and basically does some gives him a taste. I think it might even like literally land on his tongue. I'm not sure. But gives him a taste of it, and he's like, "This is almost the opposite of what magic is supposed to be, as I understand it." Holy crap! I don't know if he refers back to this. If like Harry as narrator goes back to this, but I'm curious because it looks like, you know, this is his first contact. I don't know if he consciously makes that connection later.
You should put a pin in this, write it down, because I think this is a really good thing to think about for the deadbeat discussion. Because I don't think we can really do it justice without really getting into deadbeat, because I just reread deadbeat.
So the real question is, since he set so much up in this, is this set of spells, is this the first appearance of the Black Council? That's the question then.
I mean, they explicitly are, and I am pretty sure this is a retcon. I don't mind it, but I am pretty sure this is a retcon. The nameless characters who were presenting the gifts, those two show up later. And the gift given to Leia shows up later, explicitly mentioned to be a Black Council gift. So I'm pretty sure this is, and I'm pretty sure that everything in the first two books that's in hindsight, that is claimed to be Black Council in hindsight, I think those are retconned. I think this is deliberate.
See, I think you just vastly underestimate the power of author says shiny.
Yes, exactly.
You know? It's not deliberate retcon. It's like there.
Yeah, I can
know
make
what that
use of
means.
this.
I can do that. Yeah.
I will say, in terms of setting things up, in the very first book, I didn't, even on my second reread when we first discussed Stormfront, I had forgotten about Rachel, and I had forgotten how big of an impact Rachel had. But Rachel, I would argue, indirectly kicks off the war between the Red Court and the White Council. So, for those who don't remember Stormfront, in Stormfront, Harry starts a fight with Bianca in the Red Count in her mansion. Bianca feeds on one of her thralls, Rachel, in order to regain lost energy and to satisfy the demon that the Red Court vampires have inside them. And feeds on her too hard and kills her. And here, in this book, Rachel apparently she left behind a ghost, and her ghost has been literally haunting Bianca ever since. And that's why Bianca and Mavra teamed up in order to try to get vengeance on Harry Dresden. That's why she arranged the whole party. That's why she was so enthusiastic about giving him the tombstone. Here lies Harry Dresden. He died doing the right thing. And by the way, that tombstone shows up again and again throughout the rest of the series. But I would argue that one character who was mentioned in one chapter of Full Moon, chapter 9, and nowhere else in the whole book, just one more innocent victim, ended up actually getting this all started. And that is what I mean about actions having consequences in the Dresden Files universe. Both the good that you do, but also the evil.
Well, and one other interesting thing with this, since you're talking about Rachel's ghost appears in this book relatively late, and actually kind of explains the situation to Harry, kind of explains what who she is and like why and what she's been doing. And Harry's like, oh, that's why Bianca's so angry. And also, I think it was, does he say? I think it was, his meeting Rachel's ghost gives him the idea that actually gets him out of this in the end. Complete spoiler, very end of the book. Harry is, coming out of the vampire mansion, is, confronted by Bianca and her court, decides to pick a fight because he's Harry and that's what he's going to do. He does eventually learn not to do that occasionally, in later books. But he does pick a fight, and basically, he does some damage, but he and Justine and I'm trying to think, was there anyone else immediately involved? Anyway, they're about to get their heads ripped off. Harry calls up, like, basically all the ghosts of people who were who the Reds have killed around there, which is a lot of them. And not only does he call up ghosts, which is what had been happening to him, he's able to do this partly because Bianca and Mavra had been deliberately weakening the border between our world and the Never Never, had been deliberately assaulting that, and that lets him call up these ghosts easier than he would have, which is another case of basically Harry turning the enemy's weapons against him, which is what he ends up doing in Full Moon. Not quite the same in Stormfront. He doesn't use the weapon against him. He just lets it loose. In that case, and he's like, okay, no, I didn't tell it to come eat you. I just let it go. Yeah. And so I'm also curious how much he pulls the same kind of trick in later stories. I know that
changes.
Oh yeah,
Deadbeat, yes,
definitely.
okay, yeah, those two, and I can't recall enough of the other. Okay, part of Blood Rights, he kind of does the same thing he does in Stormfront, where he's like, yeah, I'm not turning it on you. I'm just, ripping off the chains, and it's going to do what it's going to do.
Turncoat, absolutely. The entire victory condition hinges on the fact that he has figured out the rules that the bad guys have broken and what he can do to make bank off it. In other words, if the bad guys weren't going to bad, if they were just stayed good, if they didn't cheat, they'd be fine. But if they do the bad thing, he's got them nailed. And that which makes the victory so satisfying, which is because it ties in with the whole thematic thing that Harry Seldon and Uriel were talking about, which is choices have consequences. Choose well.
Nicodemus Noose. That didn't quite succeed, but that's
yes.
Yes.
Yep. It comes up a lot, and it's honestly the most satisfying of his victories when it's conditions that are very clearly set up at the beginning of the book, but done in such a way so that you don't realize it until afterwards. And afterwards you realize, oh, of course it had to be like this.
Yeah.
I mean, here, the entire first half of the book is all about establishing that the ghosts are getting stronger. They're able to influence way more than they usually could. And this is somebody's fault. And we need to figure out who. But when they figure out who, that doesn't change the fact that it's still going on. And so bringing back those ghosts, it made perfect. I wouldn't have thought of it but it made perfect sense, and that's the best kind of solution, especially when you have literal magic
Yes.
that your main character uses.
Mhm.
You have to be very careful about how you solve problems, because it's very easy to pull a Deus Ex Machina. In some cases, literally, given that we have Michael Carpenter as a main character, is very easy to pull a solution out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And this was the opposite of that. This was very much something set up from the beginning that, there's no other way you could have done it.
He beat Lenny Kravitz's ghost, this powerful ghost, because of the very evil that allowed ghosts to form easily. So he was able to manipulate that, taking great personal risk, granted, with the help of Susan Rodriguez, who's also fighting her own demons, literally, producing his own ghost, who's a better sorcerer than Leonard Kravitz by a million, and boom, he wins. But again, he couldn't have done it if the bad guy hadn't done the thing that the bad guy had done, which was weakening the borders of the spiritual world and letting ghosts form more easily and be more powerful.
Okay, I did want to say, it's Leonid. Is Leonid it's Kravos. Lenny Kravitz is a musician.
Oh, right. Yes, sorry. Oops.
So Harry Dresden does not kill Lenny Kravitz in this book.
I'm wondering if we're going to see the same sort of thing with the Starborn. I'm really wondering that. If that has got something to do with, well, he's Starborn because something about, the stars were right and they did something and he was produced at that time and that's what gives him power over them or something like that. I don't know. But that's just speculation. But even the Deus Ex Machinas can be really funny if they happen right and they're not like, just a cop out like with Father Fort Hill and you needed a babysitter again, didn't you?
Yes.
My car broke down at your house.
I love how
I was about to mention that is on the TV tropes page, where Michael Carpenter has coincidence as superpower.
I love how much this is our first introduction to Father Forthill. I love how it takes something like 12 more books before at one point he needs Forthill to do something for him, and Father's saying mass, come back in a little bit, and Harry Dresden, wait, you say mass? And having completely forgotten that, he does occasionally do things other than, direct plot relevance. But to add to the setting up something at the beginning that the bad guys do that the good guys, I think the single biggest example of this is White Knight, because that's a that's a 4-book setup until it finally until the consequences of the bad guy's actions finally catches up.
And the good guys, Harry's choices, right?
I am not going to spoil it further because we've already spoiled half the remaining series, but
you're talking about how Harry survives, like how Harry is able to resist the mind control paralyzation. Okay.
Yep.
Plus his relationships with the various Fae courts, what it means for his relationship with his godmother, what it means for the debts he owes, how that's all going to get paid out, because he's like our Congress. He keeps punting the national debt down the road, right? And it's gonna come down at some point, right? It's gonna be like what do they call it? The pigs, Portugal, Ireland. Yeah, it's gonna happen, but not today. Today, I'm just so.
But the ultimate enemy in this series is the Outsiders, and the Outsiders are the embodiment of choices don't have consequences. Mm-hmm. That is their, that sort of chaos is their thing. And there was something else somebody said in one of the books, don't remember what, something about all power, that responsibility was the price of power, or something like that. That men were free because they were weak, or something like that. But
I know what you're talking about because he makes a crack about how Stan Lee said it better or something like that.
Yes.
But yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Remember that.
I am worried. I am worried that this is going to end up being that this is. Well, I'm actually. I'll save that for whenever the next book comes out.
Yes.
Because that would be getting into stuff that has very little to do with this one.
Right. Right. So where are we at now, Zachlog? We're at we've gotten him through the various death curse. Oh, Thomas, his relationship with Thomas, and the White Court and Justine. There's a lot of cool stuff there.
It's this is one of the ones where I think he is I think this is a deliberate setup. I don't think this is him going back and
deliberate.
Because
there's no way he didn't plan this.
I should have the series order up when I do these talks because I don't know how many books down the line this is. I know which book it is. I know it's Blood Rights.
Blood Rights is book 6, and this is book 3.
Okay. And yeah, I know.
Summer Night and Blood Rights. That's the one with the shroud.
Mm-hmm.
Death Mask.
Death Mask.
Okay.
Thank you. I always get that confused with Deadbeat for some reason.
So yeah. And so yes, he meets this White Court vampire, who, for one thing, is somewhat on the outs with the White Court to the point that sending him as a representative to Bianca's ball is a deliberate insult. Which is,
and possibly a death sentence is win-win.
Yeah.
And he meets this White Court vampire, who is strangely helpful. And actually, what is it? Thomas in this book, at least, a little bit reminds me of Jack Sparrow, at least from the first Pirates movie.
Yes.
Because later on, it's not quite the same. But in the first movie, one of the fun things about Jack Sparrow is you never know whose side he's actually on at any given moment. It keeps changing, and it's still at every moment it makes sense. Like, it's not like, oh, he flipped sides, why would he do that? It's like, well, yeah, of course a guy like this would do that. And in this book, Thomas seems very much like that lovable rogue whose allegiances are completely completely unknown, and is likely to unfortunately betray you at a crucial moment.
Right. But there's this question about are there good qualities? Because in the first pirate movie, which I liked, as far as I'm concerned, the other movies don't exist. The British Navy. I always root for the British Navy, right? Nonetheless, I know I do. Sorry, 19th century British Navy, Horatio Hornblower. I always root for them. Anyways, the also they've got I can go on about their history, but carry on. So, but then you've got pirates, and I always root against the pirates because pirates are pure evil and must be destroyed. Think about our history as Americans, right? With the shot heard around the world. So, and the Falls of Montezuma, the shores of Tripoli, yada yada. All that said, you've got the good guys, the Navy, but they're not really the good guys, are they? They can be corrupt because there's the East India Company and all that nonsense going on. And you've got the pirates, and they're always bad, except there's Jack Sparrow, and there's worse pirates. You think pirates are bad? Let's give you zombie pirates. So there you've got Thomas, right? He's the Jack Sparrow. Yeah, pirates are bad, vampires are bad, but then you've got the zombie pirates, you've got the Red Court vampires, you've got the Black Court vampires. Maybe in comparison, the White Court aren't so bad. But maybe I thought that was a nice setup.
But you've two things. I didn't really appreciate it until I did the reread.
Yeah.
But first off, Thomas, at least as he's presented in this book, at the start, he is the perfect foil to Michael. They are like as opposite as you can get while still being on the same team, like almost perfectly opposites. And you get this whole thing, and there's these great, they're playing off against each other, like they have to come out through a brothel when Michael is not happy about that. And but at the same time, he doesn't treat Justine like food.
Mm-hmm.
He does not treat her like food, and we don't really see other White Court vampires, so we don't really get how odd that is for them. But that's there from the beginning. And that regardless of whatever he had plotted out before this, he knew exactly what the White Court and the Red Court, the Black Court, were supposed to be like. So this is deliberate. Yeah. This is foreshadowing stuff, and this is showing that Thomas isn't just a monster. He is a monster, but he's not just a monster.
A monster. Well, you see that he straight up tells you how bad the White Court is, and their issues in the scene with Lydia in the resolution at the end of the book, where Thomas keeps Lydia under control using his demon, and Harry has to lay down the law and say, "You're not killing this girl." Too bad. So sad.
Was Thomas because White Court vampires can eat pieces of people or mentally
without killing.
He was about to take that whole swig and drain her dry, and Dresden threatened to kill him if he tried to do it, because he was all in.
Anyone else on this one?
It's in. Let's see if I can find it. Hang on. It's in toward the end of the book. Hang on. Hang on. Let's see. So it would be in the last chapters. Lydia's weight. I knew what had happened, where the nightmare had come from. The vampire was keeping her distracted. I don't know how long I can distract her. Dresden, quit gawking and do something. I'll put on afternoon theater for you later if you want to watch that bad. Hurry. So you can see there's a tension between what he wants to do and what his demon wants to do. And finally, they've got her cleared out. The girl is saved. The demon that's possessing the spirit of evil. What's his face? Kravos, not the poor musician, has been destroyed, and he's gonna follow through on that, right? Fooling around with Miss Lydia, because hey, why not? And feed, right? Great appetizer. Now it's time for the dinner, and he says, "Get away from her," and "I'm hungry. It won't kill her. Not the first time. No, get off of her, or you and I are going to have words." And Thomas's lips peeled back from his teeth. They look like human teeth, not vampire fangs. He looked away first. He closed his eyes, and he backed down. So yeah, he threw down.
So
to keep Lydia from getting eaten. Now maybe he wouldn't
have eaten her
all the way, but
So, but he wasn't. Yeah. Okay. My point was he wasn't she was not. Okay. If you take Thomas's word, she was not in danger of immediate death.
Right. Why should Harry do that? Why should the reader do that? Well, we're at this point in the story, right? That's why I keep saying that's why the spoilers are interesting, because we know things that people who may not have read the other books don't know. There's more to Thomas than meets the eye, but we don't know that yet. So he's like, "What? Let me have her, Harry." And Harry's like, "We are partners of convenience. Leave the girl alone. You don't get to eat her."
But that really, I think that it's implied throughout the whole thing that the White Court feeding is almost like the Red Court infection, in that the target is presented with some kind of desire, and the target has to give into it and give themselves to the White Court vampire.
Yes.
And the problem is, if that happens, generally speaking, unless the target is another White Court vampire, they can't just eat them all immediately. Although
no, there's scenes later in the one where they do the set of the porno films. I can't remember which one that's in.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know what
and
I'm
then
talking about.
they talk about how the White King had the ability, but that was something where they talked about how he had the ability to eat people, like just by giving them a kiss on the cheek, right?
And he could, but I'm saying that there's clearly cases where once you get they can feed to death on the individuals. You can enslave them by feeding on them sexually. They're sex vampires. It is
At least some
merely
of them are sex
right.
vampires.
And they can definitely, that's true. They've got the different they feed on emotions, right?
Right.
Mavra,
not Mavra.
Skavis and
Skavis and
Malvora.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, there's no reason to assume at this point that the White Court vampires are any less potentially deadly to a human being.
Right.
And Harry's very clear at this, and this is important because you're going to have to figure out, well, can Thomas be redeemed? Is this White Court vampire? Is this something that can happen in this story? Is there a reason that we're talking now about Thomas as if he means a lot more than just another White Court vampire who's an ally? He's a parallel to Father to Michael. And then they're like exact opposites. But are they exact opposites, or are they more like Faramir and Aragorn? And is it more like Snape and Harry Potter? They're both following that same track, right? They've chosen love, they've chosen duty, and therefore, even though one is greater, the other's lesser, they're still heading down that same road. Some of people. So I love a representation like that.
That question is still unresolved at the current point in the story.
Yep.
Although, also, 1 point from referring to 1 point from Battleground, from the ending of Battleground, I guess kind of from the ending of Peace Talks, but if Thomas is able to come back, it's quite likely someone's going to have to die to get him back. Although there is at least one other established way out.
Right.
I've seen. I don't. Did you watch our talk on Peace Talks and/or Battleground, Codex?
Yeah, I'm skipping only the earlier stuff. Anything that's to do with the short stories or things like that.
Confession, I have not read Battlegrounds yet, so please don't spoil it. I need to read that.
Have you read Peace Talks?
Yes.
Okay, so this is relevant to Thomas's status at the end of Peace Talks. And he's basically put into magical stasis. He's pretty darn near dead. And it seems plausible from what we know of White Court vampires that he might be able to come back, but he is going to eat someone to death in the process of doing so, if that happens. Except, we do know of one case where someone should have died, but didn't. Well, no, okay, 2 cases, but I don't think they're going to redo that. The other one is...
Don't say if it's not in this, but if you know someone was supposed to die and didn't, don't say.
Yeah, that's
at this point. And I think I know one of the ones you're talking about, but don't say, because I remember when it happened, when I read it for the first time, it was like, oh my gosh, so don't.
There is a type of there is established elsewhere in some of the stories, a type of person, who I'll say it's in the short stories, and that's all I'm going to say, who can survive what would usually be a fatal feeding from a White Court vampire.
Yep.
One other thing. I was
really surprised by that when it showed up, so don't spoil it.
Okay, so one other thing about the White Court, and again, this is Dresden verse in general. We later find out there's different varieties of them. There's Wraith, who feed on lust, And their fatal weakness is genuine love. There's also Scaevus, who feed I can't remember. There's Scaevus and there's Malvora. One of them feeds on fear, and the other feeds on despair.
I believe it's Scaevus for fear and Malvora for despair. I believe.
Okay. And so, one thing I thought was kind of interesting, and maybe I've heard someone say there's a fourth white court. If so, that totally blows this out of the water. But if there's three, and it's lust, fear, and despair. There are also three swords, which is love and faith and hope. And
Ooh.
hope is the opposite of despair.
Nice.
And faith, it doesn't match perfectly, but I think you could put faith against fear. Hope is clearly the opposite of despair, and love is what the wraiths cannot stand. And it also is like, so the three swords are against the 50 the blackened denarius. Also might have something to do with with opposing the white courts.
Plus, we know that the swords present themselves to the descendants of kings.
Ooh, good point.
And one other thing with that, and I can say this without spoiling. In Battleground, you actually finally you do see the bearers of Fidlacius and Esperacius, their roles in that story actually do match the names of the swords too. If you watch what they do in the story,
these should be safe for these should be safe for the book that talks on those books, though, I think. So I keep saying we're going to be talking about them, right, at some point, and they're coming up, and that's a really important discussion when they show up.
I need to reread
and the
everything.
other sword carriers who show up, and you get to meet all the different personalities.
Battleground has already happened. Harry and Chris and I covered that.
Okay, no, but I'm talking about the one that's coming up with the Shroud.
That's true.
Because that's where we're introduced to the concept of the three swords and the three people and the three cardinal virtues. Are they cardinal virtues? I'm not actually Catholic myself.
Theological virtues.
Thank you.
Cardinal virtues are the four cardinal virtues. Justice, prudence, temperance, fortitude. Yeah.
The opposite of the peg laws. Got it. From Dante. Pride, envy, gluttony, lust, avarice, sloth, and wrath. Peg laws.
Yes.
Classical education for the win.
I will say one other foreshadowing, and this is far, far less spoilers. Of all things, I had no idea that this was foreshadowed 2 books in advance. Larry Fowler is mentioned. So in this, when they are going to, when Michael and Harry are trying to track down what happened to Charity, they go into a random gas station and demand to know, did a heavily pregnant woman come in here with someone who looks like my exact double a few minutes ago? And that's a rather strange question to ask. And the guy says, what, is this your brother or something running around with your woman? Am I going to see this on Larry Fowler tomorrow? Ooh. Establishing that this is someone with one of those reality TV shows that do weird things. And that I
bet people in Chicago watch.
Yeah. That's a great tiny little detail. I went back and looked. Previously, Susan was mentioned in the very first book, in Full Moon. Susan was mentioned as having shown up on the Larry King show. And in the end. So I think in between this, he realized, wait a minute, I can do something with this. I can make this an actual plot point and an actual running gag, and set up a fictional TV show host that I can actually use as a character, because the real Larry King would probably get mad if I just wrote him into the books.
Yeah, you get
And
there's issues.
he set it up early. He set it up 2 books in advance, and I like that.
Nice. That is nice. And oh, by the way, I looked it up, and it is in fact reversed. The Malvos are fear, and the sorry. Oh, I just pulled it up. Did I just go back here? Shoot, no, I'm carry on. Here we go. The court's House of Wraith is lust, Malvora is fear, and Scavis is despair. So we did have it backwards.
Sorry.
So okay, one other thing, again, to go back to like introducing elements later. Like I said, we meet Leia Lananshi, not her real name, because we never hear real names of non-human entities in this book. These books, but
entirely correct.
No,
practice.
we get Glazathorg or whatever that is. Anyway, but we meet Leia, the fairies, and her introduction is I like in general how Jim Butcher does the fairies in this and in these stories, and her introduction here, because it does match, you know, kind of how they are in the older fairy stories, in the Brother Grimm style stories. They're not shiny and happy and nice. They're also not flat out evil. There's something very different from us that, you know, operates by, you know, different kinds of rules, and like learning how to get along with them is a very weird thing. And it's not exactly the same thing, but it does seem a little bit like the a little bit kind of like what H.P. Lovecraft, you know, does with Cthulhu and other creatures, trying to give this sense of something, you know, basically fundamentally orthogonal to, you know, humanity and the way we understand the world. And it's I think in general Jim Butcher does that well, and I think Leah's introduction here, you know, kind of fits that.
I think I agree with you, and I think that we see hints, very much more hints, the hints of the same thing we see in Thomas, that there's more going on than is appearing here on the surface, because she's obviously not pressing to her full advantage with Harry. She's just not. But the characterization, and I think the great thing is there's a lot of, like, I guess you call them movie monsters in here, right? You know, there's a lot of just very monstrous things, but especially with the sea and the fairies, and Jim Butcher does a better job than almost anybody of presenting them, the supernatural, as being both wonderful and perilous, and not to be trifled with, which is one of the reasons why I think that we're all, you know, happy to say, you know, yeah, you can read this guy. This guy is fine, you know, because it is dangerous.
One other note I have here, chapter 6, after they get away from Leah, Harry is like, Michael is like, Harry, you lied to her. I don't think, like, I think later in the series, I don't think Jim Butcher had quite figured out the character just yet, because at this point, like, in that aspect, Michael kind of looks like, you know, again, TV tropes, lawful stupid. Like, yes.
It's not that he wouldn't object to lying. It's that he's known Harry for a while.
Mm.
In theory, he should. It shouldn't be. I have no problem that he objects to this, but he shouldn't be surprised that Harry does it. I think it could have been handled a little smoother, but I note that the next time they need to trick Leia, Harry does it with 100% truth. And Michael is willing to help him on that.
Yeah.
So I do think that he did that because of Michael's objection. I do think that shows that Michael is having a positive influence on him in a way. I'm not sure this solution is strictly speaking better, but it was very much not lying.
Well,
Okay.
it's also
I have to digress here. Have you ever heard? You guys all know about Saint Athanasius, right? How he got run out a bunch of times. Have you heard the story about him on the boat? Okay, so he's fleeing from
there's another boat coming by.
Yeah. And he's fleeing from Alexandria, and he's traveling upstream the river Nile. He's got soldiers after him on a boat, and the holy bishop realizes he's not going to get away this time, so he orders the boat turned around, and they start pulling down the Nile towards the soldiers, and the soldiers are coming. They're coming. They shout to the boat, "Have you seen Athanasius of Alexandria?" And he shouts back, "He is very near you."
And they keep going.
Yes. And that's how he escaped the soldiers that time. But there's a strong tradition, like St. Thomas More said in Christian theology. If I can take this oath, I will. It's not going to say exact words, but you not everybody deserves the full unvarnished truth. Especially when there's other considerations involved. And
have you ever read Goethe's Faust? So it's something very, very common in all kinds of deal with the devil stories, where the exact wording of the devil's contract binds the soul and leads the soul to damnation eventually. Well, here, Goethe's Faust starts with the devil making a bet with God for Faust's soul. And at the end, God pulls the exact words on the devil. And it is the part 2 is an absolute chaotic mess, and I don't recommend it. But at the very end, it is satisfying to see the opposite of that trope called for once, and for the exact words of the bet to be played against the against the devil instead of in his favor.
It's well, another thing I hadn't considered. Okay, when Harry crosses paths with Leia in the Never Never the second time in this story, and like you said, he uses the complete truth. He does deceive her as a distraction, but he also doesn't actually lie. He has them throw aluminum nails, so she freaks out and thinks it's iron. And he's like, "No, it wasn't iron. It was aluminum." And she's like, "Why did you do that?"
By fairy rules, fairies are all about exact words as well. By fairy rules, it should be completely fine as a prank to scatter around aluminum nails, even if iron would be a deadly insult.
Well, that really depends on the kind of fairy you get. Is it the kind of fairy who's a jester, or is it the kind of fairy who's playing Calvin Ball?
Okay, but anyway,
that's fair.
But in that other encounter, Harry tells the exact truth. That's also after the ball where Harry is almost destroyed, basically because he kept on making promises and not keeping them. So that is a I hadn't connected those before, but that seems like part of that same progression. So I guess points for Michael against the lawful stupid theory. Let's see.
I think the whole issue with this book that Uriel brought up in the beginning, which was watching a character you really like and you've grown to like, and everyone's after him in the first two books for being the scion of Voldemort. I mean, Harry Potter, raised by Voldemort instead of the Dursleys, what would he be? Well, Harry Dresden, right, in America. And he's got the doom of Damocles over his head. And it's not fair because he's trying so hard to be a good guy. In fact, based on what you see of him, he's a better guy than most of the White Court, that's for sure, in terms of helping people and using magic for good. So it's so unfair. And so in this book, you get to see why, at least a little bit, the White Council might be worried about him. His desire to cut corners, the lies he'll tell, the deals he'll make, the corners he'll cut. And you can see that this is someone who could easily, because of a bad upbringing, go down a dark path. And it's hard to read because he keeps shooting himself in the foot, morally speaking. Now he pulls it out in the end, right? He does. It's really satisfying, but it's a hard book to read, and it's never quite this bad in the books that follow. This is the moment where he really does live up to what he claimed in the first book is, I'm going to be the person that I ought to be, not the person that fate and circumstance and the powers that oppress me might make me be. And you can see this turning point here where he's now on that path, and it's going to be hard, but he's on it. But it's hard to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, we are coming up on 2 hours. So, Uriel, do you have any last big thoughts you wanted to cover
Big
about
thoughts.
this?
Oh wow.
Any last things you definitely wanted to get to that we haven't touched on?
This is definitely the book. I mean, I think Summer Night is where the series really launches, but this is the book where this is the absolutely vital foundation for the rest of the series. The first two books are him figuring out how this works. This is the prime central character development motivation moments for Harry. And character development is often not fun. And that is exactly what we get in the first. But you're 100% correct. For all that I did talk up, and I still believe, the establishing character moments with that first scene with Leia are brilliant. The second scene is so much more satisfying. The book ending scene, almost, you would say, in about the same position at the end of the book, because he's learned his moral lesson and he's still being Harry Dresden, the smart ass, the wise ass, who's with pluck and rather too much guts and rather too little brains, trying to wily coyote and Burr Rabbit his way out of situations he got himself into. But he's doing it in a more righteous way. I wouldn't call it righteous, so to speak, but it's not objectionable, and it's clever, and it's done in a lot of goodwill. And I think that really that arrow drives on, and no matter he does have relapses. He has relapses in several places, but they're always relapses, and they're not reversions. And I think that's a brilliant way to start a character trajectory.
Harry, any last big things you wanted to cover?
Vampires on a diet? Susan murmured beneath her breath. Yeah, I said back sotto voce. Make hers a blood light.
And Codex, how about you? Any last things you wanted to be sure we got tonight before we close out?
Uriel nailed it. I had that one objection and he covered it. So yes, I think this is the book that gets you to the point that they're like potato chips. You can't stop with just one.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us tonight. To the audience, to those who have stuck the whole way. Thank you for listening to us ramble on about this story, and I hope you found something interesting and insightful. And God be with you.